A magician once said, "Nothing is as it seems." The same can be said for The Unknown, which many film historians consider to be the best film collaboration between director Todd Browning and actor Lon Chaney. Hello, I'm Michael F. Blake, biographer of Lon Chaney and author of 3 books, and it is my privilege to be providing the audio commentary for this film. The Unknown has been called one of the strongest and most lurid films ever made by the Chaney and Browning team. The film is one of the best the two men made during their tenure at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios. And as we see the film open, it is a one-ring circus set in Spain. The circus was a familiar theme found in many of Browning's films at the time, and it's a welcome surprise that this film survives at all. Years ago, some film archivists had a tip that a print was housed at the Cinémathèque Française in Paris. Unfortunately, if a film had no opening title or was not easily identified, the cans were simply marked unknown. Well, the researchers were shown this room of all these film cans marked unknown. Luckily, their persistence paid off, and a print of this film was found in the early 1970s. Shooting for this film began on February 7th, 1927, for 6 weeks under the original working title of Alonzo the Armless. In later years, Joan Crawford, who plays Nanon in this film, said that working with Lon, she became aware for the first time the difference between standing in front of a camera and acting. She said Chaney's concentration and the complete absorption he gave his character filled her with such awe that she never considered addressing him with the usual pleasantries until he became aware of her and addressed her first. Booth Coleman, who was a character actor who worked with Crawford years later on a television series, The Virginian, once talked to her about Chaney, and he said as she started talking about Chaney, she started to tear up about how wonderful and how kind he was to her. Now you see, the little fellow here with the devil costume is John George, who's Chaney's assistant. He was a unique character actor. He was born in Syria in 1898, and very little is known about him prior to his entrance in films, which we've dated as far as 1916. We also know that he appeared with Chaney as early as 1916 in a Universal film called Bobby of the Ballet. John was a favorite director of Rex Ingram and appeared in several of his films. His first known film with Todd Browning was in the 1921 crime melodrama Outside the Law. He played one of the members of Chaney's gang in the film called Humpy. He would later appear in the 1930 remake at Universal, which was also directed by Browning, and play the same role with the same title name. He made 3 other films with Chaney: The Unknown, Road to Mandalay, and The Big City. He appeared in numerous bit and supporting roles over the years. He appeared in both silent and sound versions of Scaramouche, Island of Lost Souls, The Black Cat, Bride of Frankenstein, The Stand-In, Tower of London, East of Eden, and Around the World in 80 Days. A real interesting trivia fact is he appears as an extra in the bullpen sequences of Chaney's 1957 film biography, Man of a Thousand Faces. He died in 1968 in Los Angeles at the age of 70. Now watch here as you'll notice where Nanon is talking to Alonzo. Chaney will actually use his foot here to pick up her shawl. Now, despite the publicity that Chaney learned to smoke cigarettes and throw knives and drink with his feet and using his feet instead of his hands, that's all publicity. He didn't, I hate to say it, but he didn't do all of that. But Todd Browning uses it as a way of drawing the audience into the story here that you actually believe this man is armless. Now watch here. Now, all these circus wagons here, some of these were later used in Freaks, Todd Browning's 1932 film about a bunch of circus freaks. And also one of those was used in Chaney's Laugh Clown Laugh. And the more astute viewers will notice that Norman Carey, who's playing Malabar the Strongman, appeared with Chaney in The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Phantom of the Opera. It's kind of almost a family reunion, you might say, on this film, because there's a lot of people here who worked with Chaney on other films or in past years and knew Lon quite well. So it was kind of almost like old home week for him, I'm sure. Now, I was telling you about Lon having to learn to do things with his feet. Well, actually, that isn't true, that he did all this stuff. He actually had a double. There was a double by the name of Peter Dismuke. He was a man who was born without arms, and he doubled for Chaney in this film. He was appearing with the Algie Barnes Circus and Sideshow, which actually had their winter quarters in Culver City, just down the road from MGM. And he doubled Chaney. And there's a couple of sequences coming up in the film that I'll point out to you where you can really get a good look at him. And he does bear a strong resemblance to Chaney, which probably helped. Now you'll notice right here we have a jump cut here. 1 minute, Nanon is in her cabin, and now you will see she's in Alonzo's. This film is missing a little bit of footage here and there, nothing that really hurts the storyline. But it's what we would call a jump cut from how she gets from her cabin to Lon's cabin in the flick of an eye. Chaney's wearing a wig in this film, by the way. His makeup is pretty simple from a makeup artist's point of view. It's basically a straight makeup. Again, this was shot with the panchromatic film stock, because you notice most of the actors do not appear white-faced. So they were able to use the panchromatic makeup, which was now being developed by Max Factor. Notice the tears coming down Lon's face. I met a man who worked at MGM as an office boy in 1930, and he came on the set of Chaney's last film, The Unholy Three Talkie, and he said there was a scene where Lon is crying over his dummy. It was supposed to be the original ending to the film, and they cut it for an alternate ending. But this film, the scene they were shooting is where he says goodbye to the girl, and he slowly cries holding his ventriloquist dummy. And he said Chaney cried real tears. And other actors I know that I've talked with said that Lon never had to resort to fake or artificial tears. He could do it very easily. Now, Browning does an interesting thing here in this film in that usually he would open up his film and he would have you guessing at something. You'd think it's one thing, and then suddenly he'd turn around and trick you. And this was a throwback to the old days of his days working in the circus and sideshows, fooling the suckers, as they would say, making them think it's something that it really isn't. And in this case, he's gone on now for several minutes where you actually think Chaney's character is armless. He builds up this belief by having Lon pick up her shawl with his foot, having the cigarette in his foot, and now you're going to see this. He's going to fight Nanon's father with his feet, believe it or not. Now, actually, this is Dismuke doubling Chaney in this shot here. It's not Chaney. This is certainly one of the more interesting Browning films from a cinematography point of view, because a lot of Browning's films, camera was always steady. He rarely moved it, played things in medium to wide shots, occasional close-ups. But in this film, he really does a lot of different cutting. There's even some camera movement in it, which I'll point out a little bit later, which for a Browning film is really quite unique. He's really gotten the audience to believe that Chaney is armless by picking up the shawl and other things. And now with this fight, you truly believe that Alonzo has no arms. And you're about to see what happens. Now, of course, here Alonzo realizes that Norman Carey Malabar loves Nanon. So he's now going to do the typical divide and conquer. He thinks by encouraging him to take Nanon in his arms, Alonzo will win the girl instead. As I said, John George was an interesting character actor. He appeared in a lot of films. It was just astounding for me after watching Man of a Thousand Faces, God knows how many millions of times, having seen it since I was 10 years old as a kid, which is what got me interested in Lon Chaney. And one night I happened to be watching it on Late Show, and I suddenly saw this guy in the background. I went, oh my gosh, this is John George. You know, film historians, sometimes we pick certain actors that we like to watch for, you know, aside from regular stars like Chaney and that, and certain character actors, you know, they'll just pop up in a little scene and you'll go, oh my gosh, there's John George, or there's Eugene Pallette, or Eric Blore, or other people. And in this film, there's two actors who are kind of my favorites is for character actors, and one is John George, and the other is a lady who'll be coming up in a few minutes here that I'll point out to you, who was an old character actress. And they just added such a unique quality to the films that made the films really work. Now, what I was telling you about with Todd Browning, how he would make you believe something, okay? We now believe that Alonzo is armless. Yet we see Kojo helping him take off the shirt. And they're talking, and you're thinking, now wait a minute, are we actually, what's going on here? Are we going to see Lon Chaney without arms? How did Lon Chaney do this? And then suddenly we see a straitjacket. So now the audience is going, oh, he really isn't armless. So Browning here has upped the ante. He's now fooled the people. And now the people, almost 12 minutes into the movie here, are going, wait a minute, he's not armless. But now Browning is going to come back and give him what we would call a double whammy. Now, Lon actually wore this straitjacket while he was doing the film to appear armless in some scenes. And the rest of it was also accomplished with wardrobe. And you notice he's rubbing his arms here, shaking it out. You might happen to notice the left hand a little bit. Something a little odd there. It's always great at seeing this film for the first time when you see it with an audience that's never seen this before, because they're watching this, and then suddenly you have this shot, the double thumb. And everybody goes, ooh, you know, it's just great. It's perfect filmmaking that Browning leads you on as a viewer, and then suddenly he hits you with, okay, he's not armless. And then suddenly, wow, this guy's got two thumbs. What the heck is going on? And you notice Browning only uses one close-up in this film of the hand. Now, we have a shot here of Lon, which we would call kind of a medium shot. You know, it's not a close-up. And we don't really see the hand. We can tell there's a double thumb, but we don't really see everything. Now, one of the other character actors I was going to tell you about comes up right here. There was a previous sequence right before this where both Alonzo and Kojo were supposedly committing a crime in a bank, robbing a bank. And they deleted it for whatever reasons. And the lady I'm about to introduce you to is Mrs. Louise Emmons. Now, Mrs. Louise Emmons is quite an interesting character. She was a semi-regular in many of Browning's films, and it's obvious he found her face to be a benefit to add a little character. She was born in Virginia City, Nevada in 1852, and little is known about her life. We do know she began acting in films as early as 1914. She appeared with Chaney and John George in Bobby of the Ballet in 1916. She was also seen in bits or extra roles in D.W. Griffith's Hearts of the World, Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Erich von Stroheim's 1922 Foolish Wives, Valentino's Blood and Sand, and DeMille's Ten Commandments. Her first appearance in a Browning film was a bit role in the opening of The Blackbird. She also appeared in West of Zanzibar. Now, there she is right there, the old lady there, right there, walking right by us. Now, she's going to have a lovely little close-up coming up. Her next to last film was Browning's Mark of the Vampire, which was a remake of London After Midnight. She died in 1935 at age 83. And some of people may remember her from a Little Rascals short called Mush and Milk, where she played the captain's wife. Now, you're about to see her right after we see Lon's feet playing the guitar, which was actually Dismukey's. There she is. There's Mrs. Emmons. As I said, she's kind of one of our favorites. Now, we're going to see a quick shot here in the master shot of Lonzo playing the guitar. It's actually Peter Dismukey playing the guitar. You'll see here in one brief second. It's actually him playing the guitar, and from the long shot, he bears a very strong resemblance to Chaney. There he is. And now, obviously, as they move in closer, that's Dismukey's feet, and they just change the angle a little bit, and it looks like Lon's feet. Now, we're going to see a sequence here as this scene fades out between Alonzo and Nanon. There's going to be a shot of Alonzo and Kojo sitting at a table, and Alonzo's drinking coffee. And you're going to actually see him bring the cup up to his mouth, and you'll get a very good look at Peter Dismukey. He also appeared in a 1929 film called The Sideshow. What's really interesting is after this movie was over, he went back to work for the Al G. Barnes Circus and Sideshow, and he was billed as the man who doubled for Lon Chaney's legs in The Unknown. And he was paid $150 a week for 7 weeks' work. Here he comes. There he is right there. You notice how he bears a strong resemblance to Chaney, enough so that they could, in a master shot like that, get away with it, and you'd actually think it was Lon Chaney. Because I have to make a confession here. I've seen this film probably now close to 100 times, and it had been about 15 years that I'd been seeing it since the early 70s before I actually caught Dismukey's look there and spotted him. So for a long time, I actually believed it was Chaney. Now you're going to see an interesting sequence here when Nanon and Norman Carey's character Malabar talk. They actually shoot through a gauze. This was being done a lot at the time as an experimentation. Now watch here as we see Chaney sitting in the chair smoking a cigarette. It's going to be pretty obvious. There's Dismukey's feet. All my years of research, I have never found a behind-the-scenes shot of them filming any kind of sequence like this. Browning was very careful about that. He didn't want you to see how things were done behind the scenes. And that was pretty true of the most part of the whole thing of the studios. They sold the audience a whole package. Very rarely was it known that a star had a stunt double. The public was often told that, oh yes, the actor did his own stunts. Like, for instance, in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Chaney supposedly did all his own stunts, when in truth, he was doubled by Harvey Perry and Joe Bonamo in many scenes. But it wouldn't be as good press back then as it would be to think that that was actually Lon Chaney sliding down the rope in front of the Notre Dame Cathedral, or it was Lon Chaney actually throwing knives with his feet and learning to smoke cigarettes with his feet. And in some respects, I miss that, because today they tell you how everything is done, you know, how a movie is shot. You know, today audiences can know what a matte shot is and what's shooting in blue screen and all sorts of other things by watching the various shorts and reading magazines and that. And it kind of breaks the magic in a way. It takes away a little something that I kind of like to make believe sometimes that there's a certain magic done to it without really knowing how it's done. It's kind of like watching a magician and wondering, how does he do these things, rather than knowing, okay, he's got the rabbit actually up his sleeve and it's not in the hat. Now, this interesting sequence here as Joan Crawford puts her arms around Lon and we see John George's reaction. This is a harbinger of what's to come. And it kind of, without really knowing what's about to happen or going to happen here in a few minutes, it kind of sets the stage for a really dramatic point in the film. As I was saying, several scenes in this film were shot through a gauze. A lot of silent films during this period were experimenting with all sorts of things, and they would experiment shooting through a gauze for a certain effect, maybe for a softer effect on an actress's face, or maybe to insinuate a love sequence or a romantic sequence. Oswald Morris, the noted British photographer, cameraman who did many, many films, shot Fiddler on the Roof by using a silk stocking over the lens to give it a certain look. This is nothing new. This goes back to the silent era. And it was something that they tried for various effects, but as sound came in, a lot of this experimentation kind of went out the window for many, many years. We didn't really see some experimentation come back until the late 30s, early 40s. Now, it's interesting here how Chaney is telling him, you know the secret, and he says Kojo will never tell. And it's interesting because this is a harbinger of what happened in one of the other scripts, the early version of the script, where Kojo is reminded, you're the only one that knows my secret. And he eventually dies because he knows the secret. Now we see here, it's the gauze sequence. You see for this wide shot. Now they go out here to the back lot, and there's nothing. And again, here, it's very subtle. You can't tell, is it on her or is it on the wall? But it's very subtle. On the wider shots, you may see it. Now you notice with Norman Carey's shot, it's a little bit more subtle. But as they go to a close-up of Joan Crawford, you'll see it a little bit more. It's just an interesting aspect of the silent era. They were constantly experimenting, even at this period of time, to get certain looks and certain effects. I mean, notice how it gives kind of Crawford a soft look, and everything surrounding her is a little bit softer. It was a wonderful period for experimentation in films, and sadly, for several years, with the birth of sound, it kind of stopped it. Silent films in the late 20s were really just taking off as far as technical stuff and in storytelling, and then sound films came in and kind of put an abrupt halt to it for several years because they didn't move the camera as much. And then directors began to free up the camera again, and the camera began to move once more. Many film historians have often speculated what would have happened if sound films didn't come along for like another 5 or 6 years. What would have been the state of the art of silent films? How much better would they have been? What would have happened to them? And it's often kind of an interesting speculation, but nothing you can really do much about. This was one of Crawford's early films at this period. Crawford, whose real name was Lucille Lesueur, was found by Harry Rapf in a contest, and they brought her out to MGM. And matter of fact, in the 1925 MGM studio tour, they introduced her as Lucille Lesueur. And they decided, no, we've got to change this name because it sounds like sewer. So they changed it to Joan Crawford. And she was now starting to rise among the ranks here as a female lead star in various films. And they'd put her opposite people like Chaney and John Gilbert and other stars kind of as a training ground. This was bringing her up in the ranks, as you will, and within another year, she would really hit her stride with Our Dancing Daughters being known as the Jazz Baby, kind of almost rivaling Clara Bow in a way. That's when her real stardom took effect and took off. Now, there's an interesting sequence here in this scene that I would love to point out to you folks. I just think it's just amazing what Chaney does here. Now, Browning has him sitting in the chair, and we go from the shot of Kojo to the shot of Chaney, and now Kojo is reminding him, look, she can't love you because she saw her father strangled by a hand with two thumbs. Now watch Chaney's reaction. Okay, he's horrified. He'll put his hands on the arms of the chair. Now watch how he'll look at his hands in revulsion, almost as if they're not part of him. And as the shot changes here, and we go to John George, and it'll come back to Chaney. Watch this. Look at how Lon's arms are extended, and he uses his feet, like his arms almost aren't there. And now watch how Browning will have Dismuke curl his toes. Chaney will do a similar thing when he makes a fist with his hands. So I always thought that was kind of ironic that it was imitating Chaney's clenching his fist. Now watch how Dismuke will pick up the cigarette, and Lon leans in, takes a cigarette, and he gets the match, and they light the cigarette. And Chaney does this with his arms extended, totally ignoring him, like they're not part of it, and it's a harbinger of what's about to happen. And he can't understand why Kojo is laughing. Watch the reaction. And now Kojo will tell him, you forget you have arms. And watch Chaney's reaction. It's very slow. The realization has hit him. And now that realization gives him the answer to his dilemma with Nanon. And watch how he builds here. Look at the tears building in his eyes. Watch the intensity of this sequence. And it's just awesome to watch him as an actor. He had such power in scenes like this. Todd Browning, who worked with Chaney, was quite an interesting character. He was born in Louisville, Kentucky. He originally wanted to be a jockey, but as he grew, that kind of put an end to his career. At age 16, he joined a traveling sideshow, and he became the barker for the Wild Man of Borneo, which was actually a black man from Mississippi in makeup. And he toured one season with the Ringling Brothers as a circus clown before going into vaudeville. And he appeared in the United States and Europe in various vaudeville companies. In 1913, he got his start working in pictures as an actor, playing comedy roles for D.W. Griffith when Griffith was at Biograph. When Griffith moved to the Mutual Film Company, Browning followed him, and in 1914 was given his first opportunity to direct a comedy entitled The Lucky Transfer. He appears as the owner of the race car in the modern sequence of the story in Tolerance. And then he moved over to Universal in 1918, directing crime melodramas, like doing a lot of films with Priscilla Dean, who at the time was one of Universal's leading actresses. This is where he met Chaney. They did their first film together in 1919 called The Wicked Darling, which recently, about 3 years ago, surfaced. It had been believed lost, and it now appears to be fully intact. By 1922, Browning's problem with alcohol began to get the better of him, and his career appeared to be all but washed up. In 1924, he went to MGM and he pleaded with Irving Thalberg with an idea for a story called The Unholy Three. Thalberg recognized it as a good idea for Chaney, put the two men together, and as they say, the rest is history. They made 10 films, Browning that is, made 10 films at MGM, 8 of them with Chaney. Many say that over the years that when Browning left in 1929 to go to Universal and he wound up directing Dracula, that Chaney was going to follow him, which is not true. The facts do not support that. After Dracula, Browning came back to MGM to make their answer to the horror craze with Freaks, but it was, which they used real circus freaks. Well, it was a little too horrifying to studio executives and the public, and the film was a major money loser for the studio. And Browning directed a few more films, including Mark of the Vampire, which was a remake of the film he did with Chaney in 1927, London After Midnight. After his last film, Miracles for Sale, in 1939, he retired. He lived in seclusion in Malibu up until his death at age 80 in 1962, but he worked in between times working as a script doctor, helping some people with scripts. Lon once said that because he and Browning worked together so often, Browning was called the Chaney director. The director claimed that when he was working on a story for Chaney, he never really thought about the plot first, but rather conceived a character, and he said the plot would continue from that point. For instance, when he came up with the idea for The Unknown, he came up with the idea of an armless man and then thought, what kind of a startling plot situation could I come up with? And he said from there, the final story plot grew from that. One of the guys that really helped Browning in the silent era was screenwriter Waldemar Young. Waldemar Young was very interesting. He was the grandson of Mormon leader Brigham Young. He started out as a newspaper reporter covering stage plays in San Francisco. As a matter of fact, he reviewed the 1913 Cobb and Dill play that Chaney was appearing in, that a few months later he would move down to Los Angeles, where Chaney's first wife, Cleva, attempted suicide in the wings of the Majestic Theater, forcing Chaney to enter movies. Young began his screenwriting career in 1917, and he wrote The Wicked Darling for Chaney and Browning at Universal. He went on to write 7 screenplays for Chaney and Browning at MGM, including the silent version of The Unholy Three, The Blackbird, London After Midnight, The Big City, West of Zanzibar, and provided adaptation for Where East is East, which was the last film Chaney and Browning made together. He went on to write screenplays for such films as the 1932 remake of The Miracle Man, Island of Lost Souls, 1934's Cleopatra, Lives of a Bengal Lancer, The Plainsman, and Test Pilot. He died in 1938 at the age of 60. He was one of these great writers that could work really well with Browning, because Browning would just kind of come up with an idea, and Waldemar Young, with his newspaper experience, was able to put together a story pretty quick, working with Browning. Now you'll notice here, there's the leg, and Chaney leans in. Now watch as the foot disappears. You'll see a slight shadow on the left back off. That's Dismuke. Dismuke was standing on the side of the set there with his leg, and Lon would lean in, and then as Dismuke brought his leg down, making it appear Lon's leg was coming down, he backed off and Lon walks into the set. It's one of these interesting little tricks that Browning came up with for this film. Now, you'll notice here, he looks a little bit thinner. Chaney looks a little bit thinner because of the surgery. Well, the way Chaney did this was very, very simple. He got a bigger cloak that hangs so it gives a looser appearance to the body. Now, it's obvious. You'd say, oh, yeah, well, this is real obvious. But it's so effective and so simply done that it just makes it work so well. One of the things Browning said when he was making a film and what would make a mystery successful, he said, is the thing you have to be most careful of in a mystery story is not to let it verge on the comic. If a thing is too gruesome and too horrible, it gets beyond the limits of the average imagination and the audience laughs. It may sound incongruous, but a mystery must be made plausible. And I think you can see in this, he did enough to make it work and make it plausible. In the January 24th, 1927 draft of the script, it suggested after the surgery, Alonzo has killed the doctor. A few scenes later, we learn that Alonzo has poisoned Kojo after drinking this wine. In the same draft, the ending is slightly different than what you will see here in the film. The action in this 1927 script shows the audience watching everything going on at once. The curtains are open. And as Alonzo is crushed by the horse, the last shot of the stage was the curtain quickly coming down and fading out to the end titles. It's unclear whether the censors or the studio decided to install the last shot of the lovers together, giving the picture a little bit of a happy ending. I tend to think it was probably the studios. Browning shot this film quickly in 35 days. It started on February 7th and finished March 18th, 1927. The theater scenes, which you're looking at now, were shot over a period of 9 days, March 7th to the 16th. Film Spectator, which was an industry trade journal, released a survey in August of 1927 that issued the rank and percentage of the movie-going audiences to a specific star attracted. Only 3 stars, Charlie Chaplin, Doug Fairbanks, and Harold Lloyd, drew 100%. Valentino, although this was after his death, and John Barrymore came in with 96 and 93% respectively. Lon came in 6th with a 92 percentage, well ahead of John Gilbert at 86%, Greta Garbo at 86%, Mary Pickford at 81%, and Buster Keaton at 74%. Most film historians are at a loss to explain why Chaney was so popular. I mean, he wasn't an average leading man. He wasn't really good looking. He wasn't playing comedy, although when he first entered films, that's the one thing he really wanted to do. And Welford Beaton, who was the editor of Film Spectator, came up with something that I thought was very unique about explaining why Chaney was so popular. He said, Lon Chaney has great box office value. He is not as handsome as Ramon Navarro, lacks the sex appeal of Jack Gilbert. His sole attraction is the quality of his acting. It bears out my contention that the public craves acting, or what it mistakes for it. The screen generally has learned nothing from Chaney's popularity. It is always looking for more pretty boys and refuses to recognize the box office value of acting. And talking about acting, Burt Lancaster and I worked on a film together, and he noticed a photo of Chaney in my makeup case, and we got talking about Lon Chaney, and we got talking about the unknown. And he said, this sequence that you're about to see was the most compelling and emotionally exhausting he'd ever seen an actor do. Now, Alonzo thinks he's got Nanon. She has said, good, we can be married. And suddenly, watch the realization hit his face. Now, keep in mind, he has no hands and no arms he's using. I mean, he has them, but he's not using them for this sequence. It's all his face and the upper part of his body. And this is one of the best examples, I think, of acting in film. I mean, just the emotional depth he comes from with this. Watch this realization of how he has maimed his body and how this entire plan that he came up with has now just literally exploded in his face. And watch how he just slowly builds this. He just doesn't start off right at the top. He slowly builds this up. This intensity that he's holding in, and it gets more and more. I love watching this scene with an audience that's never seen this film before, because you can literally feel the audience getting drawn into the emotional impact of this scene because they know what's happened. And just as Chaney keeps going and going, and the intensity he brings into this scene, it just literally, in some cases, takes some people's breaths away. watch his reaction to what Malabar tells him. And now the realization of what he's really done to himself just smacks him in the face. He lets out an anguish cry that you can almost hear even though it's a silent film. I think this scene backs up what Alfred Beaton had said about Chaney's acting ability, that people could respond to Lon. I mean, you watch this film and, I mean, he starts off as, you think he's a nice guy, and he becomes this fiend. He becomes so obsessive. And yet, at this point, and by the end of the movie, you feel sorry for him. You want Alonzo to get the girl. You really do, because you just have this terrible sympathy for the poor guy. I mean, he's maimed himself, and he's not really a bad guy. It's just he got a little too obsessive. And you just feel terrible for what's happened to him, and you want him to get the girl. And this was a wonderful aspect of Chaney, that he could play these kind of characters that no matter how hideous looking, like let's say the Phantom of the Opera, or how maniacally obsessive like Alonzo, the audience is in his corner. The audience feels sorry for him and wants him to be happy. And it's really a tribute to his acting. It's just amazing to watch. I never tire of watching scenes like this with Chaney. Even though I've seen these things over and over, it's just a wonderful piece of acting, and you never get tired of looking at this. And now, of course, Browning sets up, he's talking about his act, Malabar's new act now, and Malabar's going to explain what happens. And of course, watch Lon's reaction when he says, well, this is, what happens if the treadmills stop? And I mean, it's just so wonderful to watch Chaney's reaction, because we know what's going to happen now. We know what Lon's going to do. And it's like you almost take delight in watching Chaney carry it out for some reason. You kind of want to see him succeed in ripping off Malabar's arms. But it's a credit to Chaney in that he really could get the audience's sympathy. And again, this was all shot on their theater set, which was also used in Laugh Clown Laugh and numerous other films over the years. The theater set is no longer standing, although the two stages, 5 and 6, are still standing now at what is now called the Columbia Studios lot. This set is also used in the theater set for West of Zanzibar with Chaney. Matter of fact, the upstairs balcony where we first see Norman Carey come out and wave hello to him, Lon's double takes a very serious fall off of that and lands on a table, which cripples him in West of Zanzibar. Now watch his reaction. And of course, we all laugh that she actually thinks he's worried about what would happen to him. The one thing I really enjoy watching of this film is Browning has this one shot coming up here with Chaney, and as they walk off, and in the background you'll see the brake lever. And of course, Chaney is telegraphing to the audience what he'll do, this shot here. But just his reaction as they leave, he goes from smiling to just having this look about his face that he's going to get his revenge. And it's just a wonderful way that Browning sets this up. This is really, I think, one of Browning's best films. When the film was released, Photoplay said, "We think you will like it as an unadulterated shocker. Like other Chaney pictures directed by Todd Browning, this has a macabre atmosphere. If you wince at a touch or two of horror, don't go to the unknown. If you like strong celluloid food, try it. It has the merit of possessing a finely sinister plot, some moments with real shock, and Lon Chaney." Variety noted, "A good Chaney film that might have been great. Chaney and his characterizations invite stories that have power behind them. Every time Browning thinks of Chaney, he probably looks around for a typewriter and says, 'Let's get gruesome.' In this instance, he is again outlined strongly for the character actor, possibly as brilliantly as in The Unholy Three, although what momentum he gained on paper has been lost in discretion. Another Chaney Browning program release that will reinforce the value of this combination." However, Harrison's reports, which was another trade journal, said, "A gruesome and unpleasant picture. Like most films in which Lon Chaney and Todd Browning have been associated as star and director, it is artistically acted and skillfully directed. But those facts do not atone for the offense given by the feature to every normal-minded moviegoer. Of Mr. Chaney's acting, it is enough to say that it is excellent, of its kind. Similar praise might well be given to the work of a skilled surgeon engaged in ripping open the abdomen of a patient. But who wants to see it?" Now, of course, here Chaney will now make use. Now watch how Browning makes use, showing Chaney using his feet. And this whole sequence is really interesting to watch from Browning's point of view as a filmmaker, because he uses numerous cuts. We see the brake, we see the horse's hoofs, we go to Malabar, back to the horses, back to the drummer, to Nanon cracking the whip, to the audience. The woman is a little concerned. Chaney. You rarely see this in most of Browning's silent films, these many cuts in one sequence. But this really just took off and really adds a tremendous dimension to the film. Now you're going to see here Joan Crawford will hop down in front of the horse. This was done by doing multiple exposure. They'd shoot the horse and then shoot Joan Crawford in a certain area, so because otherwise you'll see, like, when Chaney comes up to her with the horse, it's obvious if Chaney had actually been standing there and the horse is rearing up, he would have gotten hit. And of course now Alonzo meets his end. That was done by having a dummy body there with Chaney's head, and then the horse just stomps on the dummy body. I would like to thank fellow Chaney historian John Marsalis for providing me with some material for this film commentary. I'm in debt to his generosity. And as we come to a close, I hope you've enjoyed watching this film as much as I have. Thank you very much.